ever stop to think that maybe the collapse of these huge structures, these empires, isn't always some big dramatic event? Not always the fire and brimstone we see in
All
movies.
right, not the cataclysm.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe it's more like a slow, quiet erosion. Like imagine someone just, carefully putting grains of sand into the gears of this massive machine.
Uh-huh. Or like a rumor, just a whisper that starts small but keeps going and subtly reshapes how everyone sees things until the whole foundation just crumbles from the inside out.
That's it. So this deep dive, it isn't just about the big historical stories, the empires falling in battle or revolution.
No, we're looking at something else.
We're talking about those subtle, almost invisible forces,
Mhm.
the ones that can actually unravel even the most, dominant powers.
Really going deep into this fascinating interplay. It's kind of unnerving sometimes, actually, between, well, systemic incompetence, our own sort of unwitting complicity in things, and then the power of our own internal understanding, our gnosis, you could call it,
Gnosis, yeah.
and how all that shapes the fate of empires, but also, like you said, our own lives, our own realities. Will dig into how simple subterfuge, things that seem tiny, can quietly derail massive power structures.
Okay.
We'll look at how our quiet compliance, maybe just going along to get along, actually empowers governing bodies, often through these really subtle ways they redefine principles.
Uh-huh.
And then we'll take a turn inward. We'll explore how our own mental frameworks, that gnosis, again, can be a trap, right? It can limit us, but it can also be this incredible lever for change, for liberation.
So for this journey, we're pulling from a really interesting mix of sources, aren't we?
Yeah, quite diverse. We're synthesizing insights from, well, historical resistance manuals for one, like the famous OSS Simple Sabotage Field Manual, surprisingly relevant still.
Right.
Then we'll jump into some cutting-edge psychological theory, dives into constitutional law, bureaucratic behavior,
Hmm.
looking at those hidden mechanisms of how governance really functions, or sometimes dysfunctions.
So it's like piecing together a mosaic, maybe
Hmm.
human nature, systems, and how they interact in sometimes surprising ways.
That's a great way to put it. And our mission for you listening in is really to pull out the most potent nuggets of knowledge from all this, insights that hopefully stick with you.
Yeah, things you can actually use.
Right. We want to help you see how power operates, especially in its subtle forms, how maybe it can be challenged, without needing some huge confrontation, and crucially, how your own mind is central to all of this. It often gets overlooked, right? So hopefully get ready for some of those aha moments, the kind that might shift how you see society, the structures around you, and importantly, your own role within it all.
Okay, so let's dive into this first part, this idea. It's pretty compelling. What if the biggest empires, the most powerful systems, aren't actually brought down by huge armies clashing,
Not by the big battles.
but instead by just millions of tiny, almost invisible acts of defiance, like you said before, death by 1,000 paper cuts?
Right.
Or maybe, 1,000 slightly misplaced wrenches that just slowly grind the whole machine to a halt. It seems almost too simple, but
But it's incredibly effective. That's a core concept from those historical resistance materials, especially the OSS Simple Sabotage Field Manual. It literally says acts of simple sabotage multiplied by thousands of citizen saboteurs can be an effective weapon against the enemy.
wow.
And the brilliance of it, right, is the emphasis on making these acts efficient for the person doing them, low effort, low risk, but also making them hard to detect and just maximizing the sheer number of them.
So it's about volume and subtlety.
Exactly. The real genius, the manual points out, is making these acts seem completely natural. Like they just blend into the everyday messiness and inefficiency that already exists in any big system. Think of like a tiny leak in a pipe. One drop. Nothing, but a million drops over time.
Empties the whole tank, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's deliberately not about obvious rebellion,
Yeah.
because that just gets you smacked down. Or like it's easy to spot and punish.
Right. This is way more insidious. It's about using the system's own weight, its own complexity against itself. Any big organization, any powerful state, no matter how strong it seems, is stretched thin. It just can't be everywhere, watching every little thing.
It's like that cartoon image, the guy trying to plug a leaking dam with just his fingers. It's only a matter of time.
Precisely. And there's a psychological angle, too. It's not just about disrupting operations. It's about morale. Their morale, sure, but also the morale of the saboteurs. The manual actually suggests using humor when presenting these ideas.
Humor.
Yeah, specifically to relax tensions of fear. which tells you something, right? It makes these small acts of defiance more sustainable. It weaves them into just normal life. So it's less like this big, scary act of rebellion and more like this constant low-level hum of dysfunction that just wears the system down from the inside.
That makes sense. If every little mistake just looks like another ordinary screw-up, not deliberate sabotage.
Then the system starts to doubt its own competence, doesn't it? It starts to second-guess itself. Trust erodes. It becomes its own worst enemy, slowly suffocating in its own inefficiency.
That's a really powerful idea. Okay, so let's translate that. If we think about modern bureaucracy, I mean, we've all dealt with it, right? The endless forms, the confusing jargon, the processes that seem designed to make you give up.
Right.
Could those exact tools, the paperwork, the rules, actually be turned back on the system, used as weapons of delay and frustration, like forcing them to trip over their own red tape?
You've absolutely nailed the core strategy from sources like Bureaucratic Warfare, A Citizen's Guide. It lays out these, well, frankly, brilliant tactics to expose and amplify the system's own ridiculousness, basically forcing it to fight itself.
Okay, give me an example.
All right, so imagine you get hit with some, 20-page government document about a new citizen compliance initiative. It's full of dense, legalese, vague requirements.
Sounds familiar.
Right. So your response is simple, polite even. Excuse me, could you possibly provide a 2-page summary outlining the key actionable requirements specifically for a citizen in my category?
Okay, so you're not refusing, you're asking for clarity.
Exactly. But what you're really doing is forcing them to do extra work. They have to synthesize it, potentially making it understandable. But more importantly, you're highlighting their failure to be clear in the first place. It's like asking a really messy cook for a simple step-by-step recipe. It just shows up their disorganization.
I love that. It's like saying, look, I want to comply, I really do, but you're making it impossible, so you need to fix your end. And what about that other tactic, the literal interpretation?
Well, that one's great. When you get ambiguous forms, you interpret the questions in the most literal, slightly, obtuse way possible. But technically, you're still correct.
Like the goldfish example.
Exactly. The source uses that humorous example. The form asks for dependence. Does that include my elderly goldfish? I mean, I provide daily care, sustenance. It sounds absurd, but it forces a human being on their end to step in, spend time, issue a clarification, probably document the whole exchange. It just gums up the works.
It forces friction into their automated, efficient process.
Precisely. Another tactic. Documenting contradictions. Say you get conflicting instructions from Department A and Department B.
Which happens all the time.
Right. So you meticulously follow both, document everything, then politely present the contradiction back to them. Dear Department A, following your letter dated X, I contacted Department B as instructed. However, Department B stated I need Form Y, which they say must come from your office. Could you please clarify the correct sequence?
Oh, that's good. That forces them to talk to each other, which bureaucracies hate.
Or at least issue a clear directive. Either way, you're creating what the guide calls a paper trail of their internal discoordination. You're shining a light on their internal chaos and making them fix it. It's like setting off a little firecracker in their communication channels.
And they can't really blame you because you're just trying to follow the rules they set out.
No, Faye.
Okay, what about being, too helpful? Providing excessive detail.
Yeah, that's another one. If there's an optional appendix or even just a tiny additional comments box, fill it. Fill it with exhaustive, technically relevant, but ultimately unnecessary detail. Like, regarding my application for a new recycling bin, I am attaching 17 supporting documents for full transparency. These include a historical analysis of my household waste generation since 1998, comparative charts of neighborhood recycling rates, and some philosophical reflections on the semiotics of municipal waste management protocols.
Okay, maybe not that extreme, but...
Well, maybe slightly less extreme. But the point is, it makes it really hard for them to say you were uncooperative, you were thorough, but you've also just forced someone to wade through pages and pages of largely irrelevant material, consuming their time and resources.
So the goal here isn't always to win or get what you want quickly. It's more about attrition.
Exactly. It's about forcing the system to spend its resources, exposing its flaws, demanding clarity. Every letter they have to write back, every rule they have to look up, every meeting they have to hold to figure out your goldfish question. It's all, as the source says, sand in their administrative gears.
And this applies online too, right? With buggy websites and confusing portals?
Absolutely. Document every error. Take screenshots, record videos, note down the exact error codes, the time it happened, then you report it. It makes their technical failures their problem to solve, and you've got the evidence. You can even file, say, accessibility complaints if a digital tool is genuinely hard to use. Those complaints often trigger mandatory investigations, costly fixes. It all adds up. Use those feedback buttons. Report every contradiction, every illogical step. You're essentially forcing them to spend resources fixing their own shoddy work.
Okay, so we've covered weaponizing the bureaucracy itself, turning paperwork into friction. But what about shifting this to the physical world, the workshop, the roads, the actual operations? How do these calculated inefficiencies work there?
Right, moving from the desk to the factory floor, so to speak.
Right.
Sources like the free time broadcasts and sabotage strategies go into detail here. Again, it's about small, deniable acts that add up.
Like the slowdown.
Exactly, the power of the slowdown. The manual literally says, when asked to perform a task, do so slowly. Question everything. Ask for instructions to be repeated. Pretend you misunderstand. The goal is just this steady, persistent drag on their operations.
Making sure tasks take forever.
Precisely. It requires backtracking and correction. Imagine a simple report that should take an hour now takes all day because the person claims they just couldn't find the right file or needed clarification on bullet point 3. It's deniable. Oh, sorry, I was just trying to be careful. But incredibly disruptive.
And then there's messing with tools and equipment.
Allowing cutting tools to get dull. Accidentally dropping a file and breaking it against a vise. Forgetting to lubricate a crucial part, introducing friction. Maybe an accidental tap with a hammer on a sensitive piece of machinery. Or small, untraceable spills, a bit of corrosive liquid, accidentally splashed near some wiring.
It sounds so petty almost.
It does, but the goal isn't one big explosion. It's to cause wear and tear that seems natural, but is, in fact, engineered by your ingenuity, as one source puts it. It's the cumulative effect. One dull tool is an annoyance. Hundreds meme production grinds down.
Okay, and logistical disruptions. Moving things around.
Big one. Misplace vital tools or new parts for a day or two. Or issue the wrong size wrench from the storeroom, then apologize profusely. Oh, terribly sorry, Commandant, Comrade Inspector, my mistake. Think about the ripple effect. The mechanic waits, gets the wrong part, has to return it, wait again. Delays multiply across the board.
And contamination, that sounds more serious.
It can be. Introducing things like metal dust, sand, even ground glass into lubrication systems, it scours surfaces, causes wear, leads to engine seizure, or putting contaminants in fuel. The OSS manual famously suggested sugar or sawdust. It creates a sticky mess, requires huge cleaning efforts, takes vehicles or machines out of commission. Again, it's about creating long-term problems that drain resources. About 75 to 100 grams of sugar per 10 gallons of gasoline was the specific recipe they suggested.
Wow. Okay. And physically blocking things. Infrastructure.
Yeah, obstructing movement. Switching signposts around to send people the wrong way. Helping potholes form by, say, diverting a small stream of water onto the road edge. Spiking railway switches with rocks or dirt. Placing a fallen tree across a road looks natural, but causes delays. The goal is just friction. Make every journey a little harder, a little slower. Even small things, like the manual suggests, a little sugar in the gas tank, or a few misplaced distributor caps can immobilize vehicles effectively.
These aren't exactly grand acts of heroism, are they?
No, they're quiet acts of persistent, calculated nuisance. And again, these principles translate. Think about modern digital systems again, reporting every single bug you find on a government website, even minor display issues, filing detailed complaints about confusing user interfaces. It all consumes developer time, support resources, creates that same persistent drag, forcing them to divert resources from other projects to fix the problems you're highlighting.
So it's about recognizing that this subtle architecture of decay, this potential for resistance through inefficiency, it's always there. It's not just history, it's an available strategy, often hiding right under our noses. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about a different kind of control, one that's maybe even more insidious because, well, we often participate in it without realizing it.
Our own complicity.
Yeah. What happens when the actual foundations of a system, like its core principles, its guiding laws, start to shift? Not being torn down, but subtly redefined, like a kind of interpretive alchemy that changes the reality of the rules we live under.
That's a really critical point, and it comes up strongly in texts like Walden Rewilded and On Constitutional Disobedience. They talk about how something like the Constitution, which people might think of as, solid as bedrock, can become malleable as clay, just depending on who's interpreting it.
So rights can be sort of discovered or maybe discarded. Powers get stretched way beyond what anyone originally thought.
Exactly, and often without any formal change to the document itself, without an amendment. It's not just adapting to new times. The argument is that it becomes a fundamental transformation of meaning. Words get twisted, stretched, reinterpreted to fit new goals. It's like a quiet, legal magic trick happening in plain sight.
So this whole interpretive spectrum, it raises big questions, doesn't it? You've got originalism on one side trying to lock down the meaning to what the founders intended or what people understood back then.
Right, fix the meaning in time.
But that's tough, right?
Mhm.
How do you know exactly what a diverse group of people, many disagreeing with each other, really intended? Or what the average person understood those words to mean centuries ago? The records are incomplete, language changes.
It's a huge challenge. You risk imposing a potentially inaccurate historical view onto modern problems.
Okay, then on the other end, you have things like pragmatism or moral reasoning, focusing more on consequences today, or current ethical ideals. Seems more flexible.
It does, but the criticism there is that it can let judges or whoever is interpreting basically write their own policy preferences into the law. They become like unelected legislators. And predicting consequences, that requires social science expertise judges might not have. Plus, moral ideals change, leading to instability.
So if interpretations can be that subjective, they're dependent on who's doing the interpreting.
Yeah.
What does that do to the stability of the law, to
Mhm.
our ability to rely on it?
It creates uncertainty. It means the rules can change without warning, depending on who's in power or who's on the bench. And this leads directly to what unconstitutional disobedience calls the danger of transformation.
Not just adapting, but actually changing the core meaning.
Exactly. It's presented as amendment by other means. Changing the rules without following the rules for changing the rules. The classic example they use is the Commerce Clause in the U.S. Constitution.
Right, regulating trade between the states.
That was the original idea. But it got stretched and stretched until, in one famous case, it was used to regulate a farmer growing wheat on his own farm for his own family's consumption. He wasn't selling it across state lines at all.
How is that interstate commerce?
Well, the argument was complex, but the source cuts through it. If growing wheat for one's own use constitutes interstate commerce, then words have indeed lost their meaning. The point is, this fundamentally shifts power. It moves from a government of laws to a government of interpreters.
It's like they changed the definition of commerce without asking anyone.
And that erosion of meaning isn't just academic. It affects everyone because the limits on government power become blurry, potentially infinite. Legal instability, the cost of constantly fighting over interpretations, the uncertainty for businesses and individuals, these are real consequences. Public faith drops. Limited government starts to look like a myth.
It seems so backward. But this idea keeps coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes trying too hard to make government efficient actually makes it more unstable, less safe. It's like a paradox.
It is a paradox. Unconstitutional disobedience really digs into this efficiency of inefficiency idea. It uses a really provocative line to make the point clear.
What's that?
The most efficient government is a dictatorship. The most efficient economy is slavery.
Whoa. Okay, that's blunt.
It's meant to be. It forces you to recognize that raw efficiency, speed, and exercising power is not the highest goal in a free society. In fact, the inefficiencies built into systems like the U.S. Constitution, separated powers, checks and balances, federalism, they aren't mistakes.
They're features, not bugs.
Exactly. They are the necessary cost of maintaining a system where power remains limited and accountable. They are designed to slow things down, force deliberation, prevent rash decisions or abuses of authority.
So they're like safety mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
They might make the machine run slower, but they stop it from exploding. What happens when we try to bypass them for speed? Like with executive orders or court rulings that seem to make new law.
Well, the sources argue that these attempts to be more efficient often backfire. They bypass the consensus-building process, so they lack legitimacy. This can lead to policy gridlock later on as different branches or future governments push back.
Okay.
Courts making broad policy changes can start to look like a super legislature, undermining their own role. The public sees a government that isn't responsive to them, just to whoever holds power at the moment. All this leads to chaotic governance, laws changing constantly, legal instability, and unpredictability.
Which wastes resources, ironically.
Hugely. Think of the litigation costs, the resources spent just trying to figure out what the rules are this week. Public faith erodes further. So the chase for efficiency ends up creating its own much deeper inefficiency and chaos.
And our complicity then is when we just accept those shortcuts.
Yeah.
When we maybe want a particular policy outcome so badly that we don't mind if the rules get bent a little to achieve it quickly.
That's exactly it. We prioritize the immediate win over the long-term health of the system. We allow those structural safeguards, those inefficiencies, to be chipped away piece by piece. It's like saying, yeah, take the guardrails off this mountain road. I'm in a hurry. You might get there faster once, but the risk of catastrophe skyrockets. Our silence, our acceptance, becomes part of the erosion.
So, if the meaning of fundamental laws, like a constitution, can be twisted so easily by a handful of interpreters, where does that leave the rest of us? Are we just supposed to trust the experts, or do we have a role to play?
This hits on the idea of citizen abdication, and unconstitutional disobedience is pretty stark here. It says, the duty of constitutional reading belongs to all citizens in a republic. It cannot be delegated to experts or authorities without surrendering an essential element of self-governance.
Wow, so it's actually our duty to read and understand it ourselves.
According to this view, yes. If the meaning is only accessible to experts, the lawyers, the judges, the academics, then we're not really living under a government of laws anymore. We're living under a government of interpreters. Power shifts from the people where it's supposed to reside to this unelected elite.
That's a pretty radical thought in a way. It puts a lot of responsibility back on the individual citizen. So what's the answer? How do we counter this?
The remedy proposed is about active engagement. First, linguistic honesty. We have to insist that words, especially in law, actually have stable meanings. They can't just mean whatever the powerful want them to mean this week.
Okay, push back against the verbal gymnastics.
Right. Second, constitutional literacy. Citizens need to actually read the documents themselves directly, not just rely on summaries or media interpretations.
Engage with the source material.
Yes. And finally, this leads to interpretive disobedience. Now, this doesn't mean violence or chaos. It means a principled refusal by citizens to accept interpretations that clearly contradict the plain meaning of the text, interpretations that turn provisions into the exact opposite. It's an intellectual and civic resistance.
This really connects with that narrative in Walden Rewilded, doesn't it? The character going off to read the Constitution by the pond because they're so disillusioned with all the confusing interpretations.
Exactly. And that story also has the Lakeville Constitutional Festival, this image of ordinary people gathering, debating the text, figuring it out together. It's a model of active citizenship, right? Individual understanding plus collective discussion instead of just passively accepting what the experts decree.
So that's the antidote to complicity. Getting involved, reading for yourself, thinking critically, and being willing to say, hang on, that interpretation doesn't actually match what the words say.
That's the argument. It's about reclaiming that intellectual sovereignty, remembering that foundational laws belong to everyone, not just a select few. It's about empowering our own gnosis, about how our society is supposed to work.
All right, let's pivot now. We've talked about external systems, bureaucracy, laws.
Yeah.
But what about the landscape within us? The mind itself. This is where things get really interesting, I think. What if our deepest beliefs, the stuff we might not even be conscious of our gnosis? What if that's the ultimate control lever? Or maybe the ultimate key to freedom? How do we get trapped by our own inner knowing?
You're pointing towards something incredibly profound, and this is where Carl Jung's work, especially in Aeon, becomes so relevant. He talks about the unconscious mind not just as one thing, but having two layers.
Layers.
Yeah. There's the personal unconscious that's like your own life experiences, forgotten memories, stuff you've acquired. But then there's the collective unconscious. This is deeper, impersonal, universal. It's made up of archetypes, these ancient patterns, and Jung believed it was present from the beginning, like an inherited psychic structure we all share.
Okay, so archetypes, like the shadow, the hero, the mother figure. These are built-in patterns.
That's the idea. And Jung says these archetypes, especially things like the shadow, the anima, the animus, they have the most frequent and the most disturbing influence on the ego, on our conscious self. He describes them as constant autonomous factors, almost like independent forces within us that can even have a fatality that can on occasion produce tragic results.
Oh, wow, fatality.
Yeah.
That sounds intense. So how do these archetypes actually affect us day to day? What's their biggest impact on our conscious experience?
According to Jung, the most critical effect when an archetype gets activated is that it floods the ego with an uncommonly strong and immediately fills the ego personality with an unshakable feeling of rightness and righteousness.
An unshakable feeling of being right.
Exactly. And often Jung stresses it's totally irrational, but it feels undisputed and indisputable. You just know you're right with absolute certainty, even if you can't logically explain why.
We've all felt that or seen in others.
Absolutely. And here's the crucial part. The cause of that feeling, the activated archetype, is usually projected. We don't see it as coming from inside us. We see it as being caused by something external, an object, another person, a situation.
So we think the outside world is making us feel this certainty.
Yes. Our consciousness gets fascinated by it, held captive as if hypnotized. And this, Jung argues, is why certain moods, opinions, ideologies are notoriously difficult to influence with facts or logic. People aren't just holding an opinion, they are gripped by this powerful, archetypally fueled feeling of absolute rightness about it.
Okay, so this connects directly to being caught in our own gnosis. Our internal world, these deep, often unconscious beliefs and archetypal pulls, generates this absolute conviction, which then makes us completely resistant to anything that contradicts it. Facts, other people's views. It feels like an attack on our very being, maybe.
It often does, and it leads to that vicious circle. Jung talks about defensiveness, inability to see other perspectives, breakdowns in communication. Our internal gnosis, that feeling of rightness, becomes a wall that blocks out external reality, creating this self-reinforcing bubble.
So if we bring this down from the archetypal level to our everyday self-perception, does this mean our self-image, how we see ourselves, isn't just reflecting reality, but actively creating it, like a self-fulfilling prophecy engine?
That is precisely the core message of Maxwell Maltz's psychocybernetics. He argues that your self-image is literally the key to living without limits. Or, if it's negative or inaccurate, it imposes artificial limits on you.
How does that work? What's the mechanism?
The mechanism is startlingly simple, according to Maltz, and really profound. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between an imagined experience and a real one.
Wait, it can't tell the difference at all?
It's not at the fundamental level of response. It reacts appropriately to what you think or imagine to be true, regardless of whether it's objectively true or not.
So my nervous system is basically suggestible. It believes what I tell it.
Highly suggestible. Think about hypnosis examples Maltz uses. Someone is told they're at the North Pole, and they start shivering, get goosebumps, real physiological reactions to an imagined reality. Or someone's told a pencil is a hot poker, they touch it, and a blister actually forms.
Wow, it's that incredible.
Or even that common kind of cruel prank where a group convinces someone, Bob, you look really pale today, are you feeling okay? And after hearing it enough, Bob genuinely starts to feel sick and weak. External suggestion, once accepted and internalized as belief, creates a tangible internal reality.
And that Mr. Russell story, the guy who aged dramatically overnight.
Yeah, a powerful example from the book. He believed he was under a voodoo curse and had some fictional African bug because of scar tissue on his leg. This false belief caused dramatic physical deterioration. But then a doctor examined him, told him definitively it was just scar tissue, no curse, no bug. And because Mr. Russell believed the doctor,
He snapped back.
he rapidly regained his health and youthful appearance. It shows how a false idea, deeply believed, can wreck you physically and psychologically, and how seeing the truth and believing it can reverse it almost instantly. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of our own limitations are just false ideas we've accepted?
Yeah, seriously. So people often fail, not because they lack talent, but because their self-image is holding them back.
That's Maltz's core argument. He saw people who identified with their mistakes and failures. They didn't just think, I failed that test. They concluded, I am a failure, or I'm stupid, or I am unlikable.
They make it part of their identity.
Exactly. Instead of seeing failure as an event, they see it as who they are. Maltz sums it up. You act and feel not according to what things are really like, but according to the image your mind holds of what they are like. Our behavior, our feelings, they flow directly from these dominant mental images and beliefs. We're essentially living in a state of self-hypnosis, dictated by our own internal gnosis, much of which might be inaccurate or self-limiting.
Okay, so if our minds are that susceptible, if our nervous system just acts on whatever belief or image is dominant, how could this be exploited? How could, say, a government or advertisers or anyone trying to influence us use this tendency to control us or maybe sow division? It seems like a huge vulnerability.
It absolutely is. This psychological vulnerability connects directly back to those external tactics, like misinformation. Remember the Free Time Resistance Manual, advising saboteurs to feed the enemy slightly wrong information.
Yeah, the wrong truck color, transposed numbers.
Right. It wasn't just about physical disruption. It was about polluting their information stream, making them doubt their own intelligence, making them act on flawed data. Let their intelligence become their folly, was the phrase. It creates internal chaos and bad decisions by manipulating their perceived reality.
So that inner dummy Maltz describes the part of us that just accepts things uncritically if they're presented convincingly.
That's the weak spot. He talks about how easily we get bowled over by the chance remark of a friend, like someone saying, wow, you've put on weight, and suddenly we feel terrible about ourselves. Or we get one rejection and immediately swallow the fact that we're just inferior or not good enough.
That's the limbic hijacking he mentions.
Exactly. It's when your emotional brain, the limbic system, just reacts instantly and negatively, bypassing your rational thought. It's like this automatic failure mechanism just springs into action based on a single input before your conscious mind can even assess if the input is true or relevant.
So when a powerful entity puts out misinformation, propaganda, maybe fear-based messaging, they're aiming right for that vulnerability.
Precisely. They are exploiting our innate susceptibility to suggestion and belief. By feeding us narratives designed to create a specific truth in our minds, even a false one, they manipulate our internal gnosis. And because we act and feel based on that internal image, they can foster compliance or apathy or division or whatever serves their agenda.
Like Maltz's example, if a subject is convinced that he is deaf, he behaves as if he is deaf.
Exactly. If enough people can be convinced of a certain narrative, their collective behavior will reflect that narrative, shaping societal reality, often without any need for overt force. It's control through manipulating belief, through exploiting the very nature of our minds.
So our inner gnosis, it holds this incredible potential for authentic self-knowledge and power, but it's also the precise battleground where external forces try to distort our reality, leading us into compliance or self-limitation without us even realizing the strings being pulled. Wow. Okay, so that's the somewhat scary part. But here's the flip side, right? If we can be hypnotized by false beliefs, by external suggestions, then surely we can also be dehypnotized.
Absolutely. That's the empowering message.
So how do we do that? How do we consciously take control and reprogram our own internal guidance system, our gnosis, to move towards, freedom, success, a clearer view of things? How do we reclaim that agency?
Well, psychocybernetics offers some really practical, actionable steps. It starts with actively challenging those false limiting beliefs. You have to become a sort of detective about your own thoughts.
What do you ask yourself?
You ask pointed questions. Why do I actually believe I can't do X? Is this belief based on hard facts, or is it just an assumption I made, maybe based on one past failure or something someone else told me years ago?
Okay, questioning the evidence.
Right. And would I judge someone else the same way in this situation, or am I being uniquely harsh on myself? And the big one. If there's no good reason to believe this limitation is true, why should I keep acting and feeling as if it is true?
That's powerful. Just asking those questions can shake things up.
It can. Maltz notes that this process can even stir up feelings like indignation or anger. Wait a minute, why have I believed this nonsense for so long? And that emotion can be a real liberator. Like the story of Alfred Adler, the famous psychologist who was told he was terrible at math as a kid, believed it until one day he got angry, challenged the teacher, solved a problem everyone else was stuck on, and realized he could do math after all. The false belief just shattered.
So, challenge the belief.
Right.
What else? How do we filter incoming stuff better? Avoid that limbic hijack.
Adopt the motto, it ain't necessarily so. Become a conscious filter for incoming messages. Your rational mind needs to step up and analyze. Is this true? Is it helpful? Or is it just noise or someone else's negativity or a cognitive distortion?
So you don't just automatically swallow every comment or criticism.
Exactly. You take that pause, have that rational thought coaching session with yourself, as Maltz calls it, before you react emotionally. You consciously separate the input from your automatic response.
Okay. Coaching yourself. I like that.
Yeah.
What about the theater in your mind? The mental practice.
This is huge. It leverages that core principle. The nervous system doesn't know imagined from real. So Maltz says if we picture ourselves performing in a certain manner, it is nearly the same as the actual performance for your brain and nervous system.
So visualization actually works.
It works profoundly, according to this model. Athletes do it constantly. Golfers visualizing the perfect swing, basketball players mentally rehearsing free throws. Multiplied it to personality change, too, having shy patients vividly imagine themselves being confident and outgoing in social situations. His advice is clear. Form a picture in your imagination of the self you want to be and see yourself in the new role. Do it daily. You're literally feeding your nervous system the data for the reality you want to create.
You're programming the desired outcome. What about relaxation? How does that fit in?
It's surprisingly crucial. Maltz emphasizes that practicing physical relaxation regularly actually leads to mental relaxation. This gives you better conscious control over those automatic, often negative mechanisms. It helps you dehypnotize yourself from bad attitudes. He calls it creating a psychic screen against upsetting stimuli or negative suggestions.
Like building mental resilience.
Exactly. It makes it harder for negativity, internal or external, to stick. It's not just about feeling calm. It's about taking conscious control of your internal state.
And that idea of the quiet room in your mind for clearing things out.
Yeah, that's another practical tool. Regularly taking a few moments to mentally step into a quiet space, to consciously clear the machine of previous problems or leftover emotions from an earlier interaction or task. It helps you start fresh, approach the next thing with a clean new page, mentally speaking. It prevents emotional baggage from spilling over and contaminating everything else.
Like hitting the reset button. Okay, and forgiveness. That seemed like an unusual tool in this context.
It is, but Maltz presents it very pragmatically, almost like a surgical tool. It's for removing emotional scars from your self-image, those lingering resentments, guilt, bitterness from past events. But he stresses it has to be total forgiveness.
Yeah.
Real, genuine, complete, and then forgotten. Not held onto for moral superiority, not constantly revisited.
How do you achieve that?
He suggests true forgiveness comes when you emotionally grasp that there is and was nothing for us to forgive. Using the example of Jesus and the woman accused of adultery, he points out Jesus didn't condemn her in the first place, so forgiveness wasn't even the issue. It applies to self-forgiveness too, releasing self-condemnation, dissolving those mental scars. It's about emotionally canceling the debt, wiping the slate clean in your own mind.
A deep clean for the self-image. And finally, dealing with negative feelings, don't fight them directly.
Right. Trying to suppress or fight negative feelings often just makes them stronger. Instead, Maltz advises focusing on the positive. Consciously, fill the mind with wholesome, positive, desirable images, imaginations, and memories. The negative feelings then tend to simply evaporate because they're crowded out. You're changing the channel, not wrestling with the static. You displace the negative by actively cultivating the positive.
So just like we can learn to manage our internal gnosis, our internal mechanisms, can society do something similar? Can we collectively embrace some of these seemingly counterintuitive ideas like the efficiency of inefficiency to create a healthier, freer system?
That's the hope, and it brings us back to those constitutional principles we discussed earlier, viewed through this new lens. The sources like unconstitutional disobedience suggest society needs to value those constraints on power, even if they seem inefficient.
So accept that separated powers, checks and balances, federalism, that friction is actually good.
Yes. See it as the necessary cost of keeping power limited and accountable. It's a deliberate societal choice. Prioritize liberty and long-term stability over the illusion of short-term, top-down efficiency, which can easily become oppressive.
But what about adapting to change? Society evolves, technology changes. The rules can't be completely rigid, can they?
No, and the sources make that distinction again. There's legitimate adaptation, applying an old principle to a genuinely new situation, like figuring out how the Commerce Clause applies to e-commerce across state lines. That preserves the principle.
Versus transformation.
Right, versus fundamentally changing the principle itself through interpretation, like making the Commerce Clause cover purely local activity. When fundamental change is needed, the argument is it should happen through the established formal amendment process like Article V in the U.S., which requires broad public consensus, not through clever interpretive sleight of hand by judges or bureaucrats. It's about respecting the process by which a free people governs itself.
So this really requires a shift in our collective gnosis about what good government even looks like. We need to understand maybe that unchecked efficiency can be dangerous, that deliberation, even if slow, is vital for freedom.
Exactly. We need to value that constructive friction, recognize its purpose in preventing overreach, rather than constantly trying to smooth it away in the name of speed or convenience. That applies to our systems of governance and maybe even to how we approach complex problems in our own lives.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, this whole deep dive feels like a real call to awareness, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about how systems can subtly decay through incompetence or sabotage, or how we limit ourselves with our own unexamined beliefs. The starting point seems to be conscious engagement.
Absolutely. It comes back to that idea of eternal vigilance mentioned in those constitutional sources. But the vigilance isn't just about watching out for external enemies. It's vigilance against the subtle erosion of meaning, against interpretations that twist laws, against letting experts take over the fundamental job of self-governance. It's vigilance against our own mental blind spots, too.
So how do we practice that vigilance? What's the path?
It starts with reading, according to the sources. Careful, direct, independent reading, whether it's foundational legal texts or metaphorically, reading the instruction manual for your own mind through self-reflection and learning,
Then thinking.
then thinking.
Yeah.
Clear, critical, independent thinking. Questioning assumptions, analyzing arguments, distinguishing fact from suggestion, meaning from distortion.
And finally, action.
And finally, action. Informed, principled action. That might mean challenging bureaucratic nonsense, participating in civic discourse with linguistic honesty, or actively working to reprogram your own self-limiting beliefs using the techniques we discussed.
So the goal of this deep dive really is to equip you, the listener, with some tools. Tools to apply that linguistic honesty, to maybe practice interpretive disobedience when faced with distorted meaning, and crucially, to harness the incredible power of your own gnosis to navigate the world more clearly and effectively.
It's about empowering your discernment, cutting through the manipulation, recognizing the unseen forces at play, both outside and inside, and reclaiming your agency to shape your reality.
We've covered a lot of ground, from how incompetence and sabotage can subtly undermine huge systems, to how our own quiet compliance plays a role, and finally, the immense power and potential pitfalls of our own internal gnosis. It really spans the macro and the micro.
It does. And here's a final thought to leave you with, maybe something to mull over.
Yep.
If your own nervous system truly cannot tell the difference between something you vividly imagine and something that's actually happening,
Yeah.
and if our collective beliefs can literally reshape the meaning of the rules that govern us, what currently seems impossible, that might actually become possible for you personally or even for society if you genuinely dehypnotize yourself from those limiting beliefs and the narratives you've just passively accepted.
What potential is unlocked when we take conscious control of that inner world?
Exactly. How will you use this understanding, this awareness, to become an architect of clarity, of freedom in your own life, in your own sphere?
The deep dive, as always, is really just the beginning for you. Keep exploring these ideas, keep questioning, keep noticing, and most importantly, keep applying these insights. Because your conscious engagement, your empowered gnosis, might just be the most powerful force there is.